All right, Jon Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now. Our second big thing focuses on a heavyweight showdown on Saturday night in Boston between BYU and UConn. It is a homecoming game for A.J. Dybantsa, the New England native, coming back to play one of the best brands in college basketball, a program that has won 2 of the last 3 national championships. It is a game that I have looked forward to since I found out that it was going to happen during the offseason. And I firmly believe this. UConn has obviously put a major imprint from Jim Calhoun to Dan Hurley at Madison Square Garden. UConn has always been great at MSG. But make no mistake about it, there is an opportunity for UConn to play an annual game in Boston. And I remember what it sounded like when UConn played in the East Regionals in 24 at TD Garden in Boston. San Diego State was eviscerated. Illinois was eviscerated. 30-0 run in the Elite Eight. There is no reason why UConn would not play a game in Boston every single year. You got the North End. You got the Seaport District. There's enough there for the UConn fan base, which is now, again, 90 minutes away from Stores, to play an annual game in Boston. But let's get to the BYU game itself. BYU is a program that is now a couple of weeks in to the most anticipated season in program history because of the addition of A.J. Dybantsa. And you don't put a lot of stock into what happens in the guarantee games, but BYU did play an improved Villanova team in Vegas on opening night and got the win. And BYU, clearly so far this season, has 3 very talented offensive players. Richie Saunders, who averaged 22 points per game last year in the NCAA tournament when BYU advanced to the Sweet 16 and lost to Alabama. A.J. Dybantsa and Rob Wright. That is your main troika for the Cougars, along with Keba Keita, who anchors the post spot. And this is going to be a major stage for those players. Dybantsa has gotten so much attention, and for good reason. We know he's in the mix to be the number 1 overall pick in the 2026 NBA draft. But Saunders has been sensational this year, averaging over 20 points a game. And again, proving, and I saw this at a BYU practice, that he is not just a complimentary piece, but he's also an all Big 12 player. But this is the first installment of what I believe is the best non-conference schedule in the history of UConn basketball. UConn's game against BYU, to me, is an opportunity. And it's an opportunity for college basketball to get a look at a player that I don't think anybody is talking about, but I think a player who has a chance to be an all Big East first team caliber player this year, and maybe better if the Huskies have the type of season that we anticipate they're having. And that's Terrance Reed. Terrance Reed is a player that had significant issues last season in his first year for UConn, staying on the floor due to foul trouble. He only played 37 minutes in the NCAA tournament last year, and he committed 8 fouls in the Huskies' 2 games. But when he stays on the floor, and when his usage is at a certain level, he's one of the best big men in college basketball. Now, he's averaging close to 20 and 10 right now against, 2 mid-major opponents, but I'm not interested to see what Terrance Reed did against UMass Lowell and Columbia. I'm interested what he does against BYU on Saturday night at TD Garden. But I think this is somebody, again, that could change things for the Huskies because of the space he creates and because of the shots he creates for others. And I think if you're looking, in addition to Terrance Reed, at other variables to keep an eye on for UConn, you have to look at the point guard spot. And the best teams that Dan Hurley has had as a college head coach have had great size and efficiency at point guard. Jeff Doughton at Rhode Island and Tristan Newton at UConn. Silas Demery Jr., a transfer from Georgia, is going to step up a weight class on Saturday night against Rob Wright. There are 2 point guards in UConn's rotation. One is Demery. The other is Malachi Smith, the transfer from Dayton. And these players are going to dictate a lot of what BYU is or isn't able to do from the point guard spot. And they're also going to dictate a lot of the long-term ceiling for UConn in 25-26. But Saturday night in Boston should be an absolute event between UConn and BYU. It feels like a Sweet 16 caliber game. And it's also going to tell us a lot about BYU. BYU a year ago came across the country, played Providence at Amica Mutual Pavilion, and was dominated by the Friars. BYU is now coming east again in an incredibly hostile environment to take on one of the top brands in the sport in its backyard. Now, keep this in mind as well when you watch UConn on Saturday night. The UConn that we see in November, the UConn that we see play BYU, the UConn that we see play Arizona coming up next week in stores, and the UConn that we see play Illinois on Black Friday at Madison Square Garden, and potentially the UConn that we see play at Kansas on December 2nd is not going to be the UConn that we're going to see late in the season. Now, why is that? Braylon Mullins, a five-star freshman and a cemented starter at UConn, is still out of the lineup due to an injury. So UConn is still not nearly what they're going to be as a product in terms of a finished product. But I'll say this. I've seen 30 teams so far this season. Actually, I've seen more because I saw 30 prior to the start of the year. So I've seen probably 35 teams roughly in person, maybe 34. No team was as connected as UConn when I saw the Huskies practice. None. UConn season to me feels like Rocky III. They were the champs. They won 2 in a row. They got punched in the mouth last year. But now it's all about getting back to the beginning. And that quest for UConn begins Saturday night, 90 minutes from campus at TD Garden. If BYU is going to be taken seriously as a team that can get to a Final Four and compete for that, BYU has to go to Boston, in my opinion, and play well and be competitive in this hostile environment. I'm not so concerned about the wins and the losses at this juncture for BYU because that's going to be a hornet's nest at TD Garden. I want to see if BYU, with Wright, with DeBansa, with Saunders, are going to be good enough and composed enough to handle the hostile environment. And I was at a BYU practice in Provo in the preseason, and I was taking inventory of the Cougars roster. And I will say this, the biggest questions that I have for BYU this year, what does the depth look like after the top 5 players or so? And what will the interior defense look like? Keba Keita was huge for BYU on opening night down the stretch, carving out space against Villanova. If Terrance Reed is on the floor, the weight class goes up in the pivot. And I think Terrance Reed, along with the point guard play with Silas Demery Jr., those two pieces will be critical to whether or not UConn can get back to a Final Four for the third time in 4 years. But you know as well as I do, this is only November.